Hello, Willowbrook family. Today's deep dive is into Acts chapter 8, verses 1 through 4. When I was just out of college, one night I got together with some of my friends and we went on a night hike. It was winter, it was extremely cold, very dry, and very, very windy. Don't ask me why I thought that was fun, but anyway, we brought along something like this, a small fire starter. And after a while, we took a break and we lit this thing. And to be honest, it was just so cold and windy that this seemed just too small to do anything good. We really didn't think it'd get a fire started. And we were tired of being cold and miserable, so we decided to go home. Well, one of the guys just stomped on this to put it out. To our surprise, since it was so windy, a giant burst of sparks billowed up in the air and went far beyond where we were. And because it was so dry, it just took a few seconds, and we had little bitty fires everywhere. That was definitely not fun. Now here in Acts chapter 8, we see how one action can lead to a much larger reaction. Stephen had just been killed, and Luke wants to make sure that we know that Saul was very supportive in the killing of him. He would later find pleasure in killing and persecuting Christians, and killing Stephen was just the motivation that Saul needed to begin his persecution of the church. Now, not all Jews were this violent. Verse 2 tells us that devout men buried Stephen, and they lamented loudly over him. Now, this was notable because Jewish law prohibited open mourning for someone who had been executed. Perhaps this was Luke's way of showing us that not all Jews were enemies of Christianity. In fact, over time, some would come to believe in Jesus. But this did not hinder Saul. Verse 3 tells us that he began to ravage the church. The Greek for ravage is an ancient word that could refer to an army destroying a city or a wild animal tearing into its prey. Well, Saul would take both men and women to prison, and he was not afraid of breaking up families. Now, during this terrible time, something very interesting happened. As Saul tried to stomp out the flame, sparks flew everywhere. In verses 1 and 4, Luke tells us that this caused the believers to scatter to Judea and Samaria. And this reminds me of what Jesus said in Acts chapter 1, verse 8. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you shall be my witnesses in both Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria, and even to the remotest parts of the earth. You see, up until now, the church had just stayed in Jerusalem, but God had used a heavy stomp to scatter the believers. Saul's plan had backfired. He had hoped that Stephen's execution would frighten the followers of Jesus into silence, but instead, it scattered the fire of the faith into the very areas that Jesus said they would be witnesses, Judea and Samaria. So, when Satan tries to stomp out your flame, you may find that it creates smaller sparks that go far beyond where you thought you could ever go. The world out there is so dry and so thirsty for the power of the gospel, and it doesn't take much to see a big difference. God will still accomplish his work, even in the face of persecution. Have a great day in the Lord, Willowbrook.